everyone, and welcome to The Learning Ladder. So this is a slightly different video, not slightly, it's a very different video than the type of content I normally post, but I did a Q&A a few months back and I talked about how we'd done IVF because that was one of the questions that I got asked, and I said, would you like to know more about it and how it went and everything else? And a few people said they would. So I'm very much for sharing experiences, particularly with things like this, because I think it's important that people know that it happens to more often than you know, and I think sometimes people tend not to talk about certain things because for whatever reason they don't feel comfortable talking about it, but I'm more for helping someone else if you're going through that, or if you know somebody who is. So yeah, let's just get started. So in this video I'm going to try and condense them all into one because I've got so many videos that I've got to upload, because I took a break while I was doing my other work, but I didn't really take a break. I took a break from posting but not from making content, so I've got tons of videos I still need to get out. Try and condense the videos. So I said I'd talk about my IVF cycles, we did two. I said I was going to talk about my pregnancy and birth and breastfeeding journey. So we're going to just get through it in this one video, hopefully. So let's get started. So I talked about a bit in the last video how it all started, how we ended up having IVF, but I'll just give you a quick brief overview again. So basically we got married and we both decided during our relationship that we wanted to go straight ahead and have kids, and we were ready and everything else. So we started trying straight away. Several months passed and nothing happened. I started using the ovulation sticks. We didn't do that at first, but then we started using the ovulation sticks. I had like a monitor thing where you took your temperature and all kinds of stuff. You name it, we tried it. And still wasn't getting pregnant. So I went to the doctor and I explained, we've been trying for a certain amount of time and everything else. My cycle was always very regular. I was getting positive ovulation tests and everything else, but still wasn't getting pregnant. A few tests on me. They did all different blood tests and everything else that you need to have done when you're checking for fertility. So they check things like your progesterone level, they check your different hormones and everything else, and my tests were all completely normal. So they said, okay, so bring your husband in. So he was due to go in for his test, and then we were just go on holiday for our honeymoon. We had a delayed honeymoon because we couldn't afford to go at the time. So we were all ready to go to our trip, and he had to go in and give his sperm sample. So then we went on holiday, went to Disney World for our belated honeymoon, and then we came back and his results were there waiting for us. And in his sperm sample, they said that everything was completely dead. There was no sperm alive whatsoever, and they had no clue why. So they sent him in for a repeat test. So he went in for his repeat test, and there were some alive this time, thank goodness, but they were extremely low compared to normal male levels for sperm. It also, a lot of them were dead or deformed or not moving. So they check a lot of different things when they're checking sperm samples. So it's volume. They also check motility, so how well they're moving, how well they're formed, morphology, all those types of things, and his were extremely low. So they sent him in for more tests. So he had all different hormone panels done, and they also sent him for an ultrasound to see if maybe there was a blockage or something like that. So he had a full panel of everything, and all his tests came back normal. They could not explain why this had happened. So it's unexplained male infertility. No one knows why, and it's hard when you have no clue why, and because there's nothing you can do. You can't take hormone medication because they said there was nothing wrong with his hormones, so there was no reason to take them. So basically we were referred, well, at the time we were in between moving, but the doctor said you'll probably end up having to go for fertility treatment. But in that interim period you've moved house and we had to see another doctor in our area, and I explained in that last video that she was completely useless. She wouldn't take the tests we'd had already done. She wanted to do them all again, which is just crazy. So I, in desperation, phoned my old doctor and said, I'm sorry, I know we've moved and everything else, but is there any way, because you ran all those tests, you could do the referral? And she so kindly agreed to do it. So she referred us to the hospital to see the fertility specialist. So we saw an andrologist and in the fertility clinic as well, and they said that they would refer us on to have our cycle. Now here in the United Kingdom you're allowed one cycle of IVF, which is covered as part of the national insurance that you pay and everything else, all your taxes to the NHS, provided you haven't had any children before. So we got our full cycle paid for, which was amazing, and we went to the fertility clinic, and the andrologist that we had at that time was so nice. He's the nicest person that I've ever met in terms of a doctor. He was just so kind, and also the actual consultant as well. He was so nice as well. So we had to they decided what treatment we'd have and everything else, but I had an ovarian cyst, and it was just a fluid filled cyst. You know, the ones that you have sometimes after your periods, they're supposed to go. Sometimes they don't, and they linger and they fill up with just fluid, and that's what happened to me. It was only 4 centimeters, so it was really small. So I had to have that aspirated first. So basically they do that, well, they did with me, via ultrasound guided, so kind of like they do if you're having egg collection. So it's an ultrasound guided needle that they put inside. So basically they just use a regular ultrasound machine that they use for vaginal ultrasounds, but it's got the needle attached to it. So basically I just lay there and they put that in and then aspirated it and sucked all the fluid out. It sounds really gross, but it's not. It didn't really hurt. It just feels like a sharp ouch, that kind of pain. And then they sucked all the fluid out, sent it off to the lab to make sure there was nothing wrong with it. They also run tests on you. It's the CA125 blood test, just to make sure that everything's okay, there's no problems, you know, there's no worries about any kind of ovarian issues or anything like that. And my tests were normal. It was just basically the fluid filled cyst that you have during your normal cycle just hadn't popped properly like it should have done when it released its egg. So that was drained, and then we can start our cycle. So if you're familiar with IVF, there are lots and lots of different protocols. I have no idea what the protocols are now, because we've been, you know, my daughter's 9 now. So at the time, there was only one that was really common, and that was the long cycle. So basically I had to inject myself in my stomach every day for 21 days to send my body to sleep in terms of my cycle. That wasn't birth control, it was an actual injection. My tummy at the end was black and blue because I had that many bruises from injecting myself. But, you know, it was absolutely fine. I had no problems doing it. Just, you know, injecting myself in the stomach with the medicine. It's, you know, it's so worth it. So don't let that put you off at all. So I had to do that, and then I had to go and have an ultrasound to make sure, you know, everything was as it should be. And it was called my baseline scan. So I had my baseline scan done, everything was fine, everything was as it should be. Then I started my stimulation medication. Again, that was in the stomach, more injections. And then I had to, I think I had my scan, I think it was day 7 or day 10, to check that the follicles were growing. And basically that medication is to make you produce more eggs than you would normally do. So I had that injection, and I produced, when I had my ultrasound, had the injection every day, I think it was for 7 to 10 days, had my baseline scan, and I had 6 follicles. So that doesn't sound like a lot, but, you know, it only takes 1, remember that. So I had 6 follicles. I think some people think, oh my gosh, you have to have 20 follicles in order to get a baby. You do not. And actually sometimes less is better, because the quality of the egg, you know, is, if you are producing so many follicles, it can actually reduce the quality of the egg, and you need a good quality egg in order for it to fertilize. So bear that in mind. Don't think more is better, because that's not the case always at all. So I had my baseline scan, sorry, not a baseline scan, my stimulation scan, to check that everything was growing nicely and everything looked great. So I was sent in to have my egg collection, so that was booked and arranged. And with that, basically it's just like surgery. So you're anesthetized, they take the eggs out using this similar machine that they did when they burst my cyst, but you are asleep for this. I actually said at the time, can I not just stay awake, because they'd already popped the cyst, and it was, yeah, it hurt a tiny little bit, but not that bad. But they were like, no, you have to be anesthetized. So I had to go in the morning, you know, you have to kneel by mouth and all that kind of stuff. And at that time, my husband was allowed to stay with me in the room until it was time to go in. And then I was put to sleep while they collected the eggs. So once you come around and everything else, you have to go home, and then they give you a phone call the next day and tell you how many, well, they tell you how many eggs you've got, later, and then how many fertilized the next day. So I was told that they collected 5 eggs, so out of those 6 follicles there were 5 eggs, which was really good because not all follicles don't always have an egg. Then the next day I got the phone call to say that 4 of my eggs could be fertilized, and all 4 were fertilized, and 3 had actually developed. So 3 little eggs were sitting there waiting, well, 3 little embryos were sitting there waiting because they'd fertilized. In the meantime, which I completely skipped over, while I was having my egg collection, my husband had to do his sample again, obviously. And then we had ICSI. So basically what they do is, rather than just meeting the sperm and the egg, they actually inject the sperm into the eggs. So I had that done as well. So basically at the end result, I had 3 embryos. By the time it was day 3, I was called and said we're going to do the transfer on day 3. So I had a day 3 transfer, and I transferred 2 embryos back in. The third one didn't make it, sadly. It couldn't be frozen. They said it hadn't developed enough to be frozen, so we didn't have any frozen embryos, because if you do, then you can obviously try again for another baby. So I had 2 put back inside, and I had to go through the 2-week wait, just like you do if you've tried to conceive. At that point it's no different. They put them back in, so you go back into the hospital, and then they just insert them back in. They didn't at my clinic do any kind of ultrasound guided transfer. The touch point technique, so they just insert them back into your womb, which at the time I didn't really know much about, and I was like, okay, that's fine. I assumed that was the norm, but going back in time now, more so for my second cycle than my first, I would love to have had ultrasound guided transfer, which is where they use an ultrasound machine to make sure they're putting the embryos back into the right spot. But anyway, thankfully for me, it was obviously successful. So I got pregnant with my first cycle of IVF, which doesn't happen, so I was extremely blessed. Doesn't always happen, so I was extremely blessed. And I actually took part in a medical trial during my pregnancy, and that was to check whether progesterone does actually help avoid miscarriage. So I didn't know whether I was actually taking progesterone or not, but basically I took part in the trial to help other women to see if maybe it would help them. And I had to take progesterone until I was 12 weeks to see if it would prevent any kind of miscarriage. Obviously I didn't have a miscarriage, and that was really neat to be part of that trial, to be honest, because I know that has actually impacted other women's lives, and that now women who do miscarry are often given progesterone. Well, not often, but are sometimes given progesterone to help. So it was really great to be part of that trial. Now thinking about it, it was really nice to be part of that trial and to know that it has helped other women. So I gave my result back to the clinic. I was pregnant, and as part of the trial I got to have some extra ultrasounds, which was amazing. So I had more ultrasounds than you would do normally, basically because I was taking the medication, and although we didn't know whether I was taking the real one or not, they obviously wanted to monitor to make sure everything was fine with taking the medication. So I got to see, I had a 6-week ultrasound, then I think I had a 10-week ultrasound, and then I had the 12-week ultrasound with them, and I also had the 12-week ultrasound as part of my normal booking appointment, which was so great. But then after that point I didn't go back to that clinic for the rest of my pregnancy, and I had my baby at my own hospital. But let's talk about my pregnancy now. So that was my first IVF experience. So as far as I can say now, I think everything in terms of the IVF cycle the first time around was fantastic. No concerns, no problems. It went really smoothly, so I was really happy. My pregnancy though is a little bit different. I'd say if you've ever done IVF yourself, you'll know that because of all the medication, you bloat like really badly, and you show a lot sooner because you've bloated so much. So it looks like you're a lot further on than you are because you've got a big old belly. Well, I did at least, and a lot of it was bloat. It wasn't baby, but you're still swollen. It's still it's still quite heavy to carry and everything else. So your body kind of changes faster than it does when you have a normal pregnancy. So I was about 8-9 weeks pregnant, and my back was killing me. It was so painful. Now, I went to my doctor and I said to them, you know, I've got bad backache. I'm early pregnancy, and I know I shouldn't have backache at this point now. It's you know, so there must be something else that's causing this pain. And but because I am pregnant, you know, is it possible that you could perhaps maybe refer me to a physiotherapist or something to see if maybe it's something I'm doing, or they can help me with my back, because I know that as I get bigger it's going to get worse. And I said I did hurt myself when I was a couple of years earlier, hurt my back, which I actually thought was my shoulder because it was around this area. Now knowing back, now I know now it was actually my neck. But when you know, the pain I was getting was sort of this area, so I used to say, you know, I think it's my shoulder. And I explained that I'd seen a doctor back then when the injury happened. Basically what happened in terms of my neck and pain was I was in bed and the alarm clock went off, and I turned to turn the alarm clock off, and my neck, well, it was I say neck because I know what it is now, but at the time I thought it was my shoulder. I felt a crunch, and like a massive big crunch in my neck, and it was absolutely agony. It was so painful. I was literally doing the war dancing, you know, stamping my feet in the room. I just like flew out of bed. It was so painful. It was extremely painful. But at the time, as a lot of you, I'm sure, are the same, I was in university. I was working really hard. I was working 7 days a week in order to actually manage to go to university. I was doing my nurse training, and then I had a weekend job as well, so that I could actually afford to do my nurse training. And I didn't have time to be sick, so I tried to like muddle through and not complain basically about the fact that my neck was absolutely killing me. And it got to the point where I just couldn't anymore. I remember I was on a placement in the hospital ward, and they asked me to change the sheets, and literally just stretching my arms out to change the sheets was so painful. So I explained to the nurse at the time, who was my mentor, you know, it's really bad. And she said, oh yeah, she had a shoulder injury, and you know, maybe you should go and see someone. She wasn't overly sympathetic, because I think she thought, oh, you know, I'm just complaining because I was asked to change the sheets, but it wasn't at all. So I went to I couldn't get a doctor's appointment to see my GP, so I went to the local hospital, not where I was working, but a different one, because they had a minor injuries clinic. So I went there and basically waited for hours, as you do, and the doctor was just like, oh, you've just pulled a muscle. I've done that myself. You know, that he didn't even do any kind of tests or anything. He literally just said, you've pulled a muscle. I've done that too, you know, the same kind of thing, not to worry about it. But he did say you probably will never really completely go. The pain will probably always linger a little bit, because they do with this type of injury. So I was like, oh, I felt so embarrassed, you know, the fact that I'd gone to the minor injuries clinic and everything else. But anyway, I said at the time, going back to my pregnancy with the doctor, about this injury, and I said, do you think it could be related to that? And he was just laughing at me, literally laughing at me, because he's like, you're only 8 weeks pregnant, you're already complaining of backache. And I was just horrified. I'd never seen this doctor before. I very rarely go to the GP anyway. But I'd never seen this doctor before. And I just was like, oh, yes, you know, it hurts. There's something not quite right. And I said, can you please refer me to see the physiotherapist? And he was like, no, you don't need to go see a physiotherapist. Go swimming. That's what you need to do. You need to go swimming. I was like, right, okay. Well, can you please just do the referral anyway? I'll go swimming, but can you do the referral anyway? And he's like, okay. And that was his attitude. That was his attitude. Fine, I'll do the referral. So I potter off home, and this was, bearing in mind, I was 8 weeks pregnant. By the time I was about 7 months pregnant, I still hadn't got a physiotherapy appointment. I'd rang, I think, once or twice during that time period and told I was on the waiting list. And it was so painful that I literally could not walk around the supermarket and do my shopping without having to sit down about 3 times during the shop, because it was so painful. And by the time I was 9 months pregnant, I still hadn't seen the physiotherapist. And when I phoned, I was like, you know, why is it taking so long? And she just said, oh, you don't need the referral, you can just refer yourself. I was like, oh, seriously? All this time? You made me wait all this time because I had to wait to be referred, and now you're telling me that I can just refer myself? But at that point, it was, you know, too late. I was about to give birth. But anyway, we'll revisit that neck thing anyway. But the reason I'm mentioning that is because it was sort of indicative to the type of treatment that you get, well, at least that I got when I was pregnant. So that was number one problem I had. So I had extreme back pain, which was not resolved at all. The other problem that I had was I kept every time I went to see my regular midwife, it was a different person every single time, because the midwife that was part of the doctor's practice had gone off sick, so they just had replacements in. And at first that wasn't a problem. I saw a different person every single time. I went for my midwife checkup. It's like, doesn't really faze me, whatever, because you don't, here at least, I'm not used to having a named doctor or anything like that, and I don't go to the doctor very often anyway, so it being a different person wasn't a big deal. But it was in terms of follow-up. So around about, is it 20 weeks, I think it was, when you go to have your blood test done, like the second time. So I had my first blood test done when I had my booking appointment. I think I was 8 weeks or whatever, and they were all perfectly normal. They check your iron and everything else. They were all perfectly normal. Then when I went for my 20-week scan, they did the blood test again. I think it was 20 weeks, it must have been. And I didn't hear anything, so I was like, okay, it must be fine again. And I felt fine, to be fair, absolutely fine at that point at least. But then out of the blue, I think I was 30 weeks pregnant, so it had been 10 weeks in between. I got this letter saying, further to your recent blood test. And I was like, well, I haven't had a recent blood test, but okay. Your iron levels are really low. You need to take iron supplements immediately. Go get a prescription, basically. I was like, what? It's been 10 weeks and you haven't told me. But because it was a different midwife every time, maybe they were supposed to tell me and they didn't. I have no idea. But basically that was the only way I knew, was by getting this letter from the hospital referring to my recent blood test that I actually had 10 weeks earlier. So I go and get my iron medication, and I was taking it as I was supposed to. And I went to my appointment, I think it was 3 weeks later, and said, should we check to make sure my levels, see if they've improved? And they were like, oh no, don't worry about it, it's fine. The next midwife will do it. And it was like that every single time. So I'd go to my appointment, I'd say, oh, should we check my iron levels again? Like, oh no, it's fine, don't worry about it. The iron tablets will be working just fine. So I never got my blood rechecked. And then I went overdue. So I was 40 weeks, and I think I was 1 day when I went to my appointment, and I had extreme stretch marks. My stomach was huge. I put on so much weight. I gained so much weight because of the fact that every time I walked anywhere, my back was in agony. So I was like, pre-pregnancy, I was super skinny, and I put on, I think, about 4 stone or something. It was ridiculous how much weight I put on, and it was just crazy. So it was a different midwife, of course, and I said to her, I'm overdue and everything, but she's like, oh, well, your stretch marks look really sore. I hadn't complained at all about them, but she's like, oh, your stretch marks look really sore. I'm going to refer you to the hospital and see if they can do a sweep, to get you going, basically. So I went to have my sweep done, and it worked, obviously, because I think it was 2 days after that, because it couldn't have been 2 days. Basically, I was just shy of 41 weeks, so took a couple of days to get going, but basically it did. And I went to the hospital to have a checkup because I was obviously overdue. Noticed that I couldn't see properly, and it was like, it wasn't the whole spots in your eyes thing, because when you say your vision's affected, people automatically think, preeclampsia and everything else. It wasn't like that. It was like I couldn't actually see properly. It was not like tunnel vision, but kind of like I was seeing like lightning bolts. That's the only way I can describe it. Like lightning bolts were blocking my vision. So I'd gone in and I'd had my blood pressure checked and everything else, and they said, oh, it's completely normal, it's not preeclampsia. And they never really kind of investigated, I guess, why I was having this vision problem. The only thing they cared about was the fact that it wasn't blood pressure related, and I was sent home. So then I was supposed to come back again in a few days if I hadn't gone into labour, which is when I did go back. And then while I was there waiting for my appointment, I started leaking fluid. So they took me in and they said, oh yeah, your water's probably breaking, but obviously you're not in labour, so you can go home. So I went home, and that's when obviously labour started and everything else. And we lived quite, it wasn't a trek, but it was, you know, it's not the easiest way to get back to the hospital. And I remember getting back in the car to go back to the hospital. I was in so much pain. My back felt like it was splitting in two. So we drove all the way back to the hospital, and I was finally admitted. I went in and they checked me, and I was 6 centimeters. So I really didn't want to have the epidural, and the midwife that I saw initially was so not the person that you'd want to give birth with. She was awful. I was explaining to her that I'd asked to have a water birth, and was the water birth room available, and she was like, yes, it's available, but you can't have it. I was like, well, why can't I have it in between? You can picture the scenario, you know. She's like saying, oh, you can't do this, and I'm like, but why? And when you're in pain, that's the last thing you want. And she was an older woman, and her face was so stern. I'm thinking, I can't deal with this. With you, I need another midwife. I didn't say that, but that's what I was thinking inside. I don't want to give birth with you, you know. And it's like a terrifying experience, isn't it? You know, when you, well, not terrifying, but you know, when it's a scary experience when you're in pain and you're about to give birth and everything else. And the midwife, who is the person who is supposed to be there to protect you, is like she was. It was horrible. So eventually she said that I couldn't have the birth room because I was high risk, and I was like, well, I'm not high risk at all. There's nothing wrong with my pregnancy anyway. And I was checked, and they found out I was 6 centimeters, and like I say, my back felt like literally it was splitting in two. And at that point I was just like, I can't do this. So I asked for the epidural. So I ended up getting the epidural, and obviously the pain was gone. It was bliss. You know, but looking back now, I wish I hadn't had the epidural, and I wish I could have gone through it because of something else that happened, which we'll talk about. But I think if it hadn't have been her and how horrible she was, if it would have been someone who was really supportive, I might have been able to have gone through, because I was 6 centimeters already. You know, I might have been able to get through to the end, but you know, I couldn't. She was just horrible. Anyway, thankfully, of all things, she went. I think it was time for her to go home, and I got another midwife, and she was so much better. And if only I got her first. But anyway, so my labour, because I'd had the epidural, slowed down, and I had to have Pitocin, and they noticed that my daughter's heartbeat was dipping a bit every time I got a contraction, because obviously the contractions were stronger with the Pitocin. I didn't feel them at all because I had the epidural. So they put like a little thing on her head, and while they were doing that to monitor her heartbeat, noticed that she was the wrong way. Not that she was breech, but that she was sunny side up. So basically that's back to back, which apparently can cause back pain a lot. So that was probably why my back felt like it was splitting in two when I was giving birth. Well, you know, in labour giving birth, because of her position. So she would have been born, I think, that night had I have not had the epidural, but because it slowed everything down, we'd gone into the next day. I remember just laying there watching my husband. He was asleep in the chair, and I wasn't in any pain though, and you know, I just was listening to my daughter's heartbeat on the monitor and just quite chill at that point. Then I went into labour. What am I talking about? I started pushing to give birth, and everything was going okay. I think I'd done 2 pushes, and then she said they saw meconium, which was not really surprising because obviously I was overdue. And the fact that her heart rate had been dipping, it probably had affected her somewhat. So I had to hurry up and push more. So I did. I think I pushed again, and at that point she came out. They rushed her over to the resuscitator because she wasn't breathing properly. Thankfully, you know, of all thanks, they sorted everything out, and then she was able to come back to me, and you know, she was absolutely fine. But she had swallowed some of the meconium, so we had to stay, you know, to make sure everything was okay. But whilst they were, you know, seeing to her, they were seeing to me down there, and I'd tore really, really extremely badly. I didn't feel anything because I'd had the epidural, but he's trying to sew me up. He's like, I can't get some help, and I'm just like, oh, you know, trying to worry about my baby over here. I'm like not even looking at me, what's going on down there at all. So I remember another doctor coming, and they were like sewing me up, and then they brought my daughter over, and I'm holding her, and I felt so much better because she was here. for about, I'd say about 5 minutes, and then I suddenly started feeling really, really faint and dizzy. And it was because I was still bleeding, and apparently I was bleeding quite heavily. But they managed to get me all sorted down there. It was an extremely bad tear though, which is why I wish I hadn't had the epidural, because I probably wouldn't have pushed the way I did. If I would have had the epidural, probably would have been a bit more controlled maybe, I don't know. But anyway, they managed to sort that out, but we had to stay overnight because of the fact that my daughter had swallowed the meconium, just to make sure there was no problems. So we were taken to our room, which was really nice, and because they were worried about infection, we actually got our own room, which is unusual because usually you're on the ward. So we're in the room, and here husbands are not allowed to stay. So he was kicked out after a certain point and told he had to go home. And I spent the night, with my daughter. And, she was really upset because of the meconium she swallowed and everything else. But, we got through the night and everything else. So the next day, my husband came back, and the doctor came in and said, oh, we've just got your blood test results back, and you need to have a blood transfusion because my blood, I think it was 3. My HB was 3. It was like super low. But I actually felt okay. I didn't, I'd been pottering around and everything. But the only signs that I had of the issue, and it hadn't resolved after I'd given birth, was I still couldn't see properly. It wasn't all the time. It was like an intermittent thing. So clearly that vision issue was related to my blood, and the fact that I was so anemic, and obviously I'd lost more blood during the labour. So that was clearly why I had the vision problem at the end of my pregnancy. It was due to the fact that I was extremely anemic before I gave birth, and because they hadn't rechecked me, I think they'd missed the fact that I was extremely anemic prior to having the blood loss from giving birth. So I had to have blood transfusion, and I had to have, I can't remember how many bags it was, but it was quite a lot of blood. So I was like going through dealing with that and having my drip and everything else with my blood going through in one arm, and trying to breastfeed my daughter at the same time, and it was hard. And I'd asked for help a few times, and they tried to help me get her on and how to latch properly and everything else. And we were muddling through, and I think it had been the full day now, so I think we're getting towards the evening time, sort of afternoon time, and I'd asked for help again to get her on, because I was attached to this drip with the blood and everything else, and it was hard to get her in position and everything, to feed. And I appreciate that there are lots of other women that are there and that need help and everything else, but the midwife that came to see me was the most, well, let me just tell you what she said. So I'm like asking for help to latch her on, and my husband was sat in the chair, and the midwife turned around and said to him, looked him directly in the face while I'm sat there, trying to breastfeed my daughter, and said to him, go buy formula, you're going to need it. And then she turns around to me and says, if you haven't got it by now, you never will. And I was just completely flabbergasted. I could not believe she was being so unsupportive. And here I am, having given birth, having a bad tear, having to have a blood transfusion, really trying to breastfeed my child, and that's the attitude that you get. So I didn't listen to her, and I carried on and I persevered. And we left the hospital. I stayed in, I think it was for two nights. So we left the hospital and went home. And I was still having issues getting her to latch. And my boobs were really, really sore because of the way she was latching on. Although she had no teeth, it was like she was biting, and there's blood, and it was the most sore I've ever been in terms of that area. It was so painful. So I went to a breastfeeding class that they had at the hospital, and the person there checked to make sure she was latching properly, and she said we can't see any reason why this is happening, and just persevere. So I went home and kept trying, and then I think it was when she was about 4 weeks old, I contacted the NCT, which is the National Childbirth Trust here, and I'd been on an NCT class while I was pregnant, about giving birth and everything. And I said to them at the time, is there anybody who could speak to me over the phone or whatever and give me some advice about breastfeeding? I'm really trying, but it's really painful. and you know, there doesn't seem to be anything wrong. But so she's like, oh, don't worry, we'll send someone round to you. And I just couldn't believe it. She said, we have volunteers who do this. So she sent this woman around, and she was so sweet, the nicest woman ever. And she's like, oh, you know, this happened to me in my pregnancy and my labour. I just needed somebody to say to me that this happens, and it, you know, kind of just made me feel so much better that it wasn't something that I was doing wrong, and it was just, it happens more than you know. And it was just that reassurance that, you know, it's fixable. So basically, she said with her, all it was time, and that after a certain amount of time, it just got better. And, you know, I was like, okay, I'm just going to keep pushing through. And I did. And then when she was about 6 weeks, literally it was like night and day. When she was about 6 weeks old, it just, everything molded into place. And I think it was partly the fact that because her mouth was so small, obviously she was a newborn and we were both learning, you know, it was all just time that was needed. And once her mouth grew a little bit, then the latch was just completely normal, and we figured it all out. And I breastfed for 2.5 years. She never had any formula. She never even had a bottle. So to that midwife in the hospital that said that to me, you know, you were wrong. So, you know, I just feel like, and I know that sounds really immature and petty, but she was just so horrible, absolutely awful. But anyway, never mind. If you are in that situation with breastfeeding and you're struggling and someone says that to you, if you really want to carry on, then, you know, find support from elsewhere. Just know that it does get better. It does. It really does. It just takes time. And you just have to be patient with yourself and the baby. And eventually, you know, as long as there's nothing medically there, usually it'll resolve. And for me, it did. And particularly because the mouth grew. So time and patience, you know, is often all it needs, provided there's obviously nothing medically wrong, tongue tie or anything like that. So try and get your latch checked by somebody who knows what they're talking about. Not that midwife, but somebody else who actually does know what they're talking about. Anyway, breastfeeding was absolutely perfectly fine. After that point, that initial, you know, 6 weeks was uncomfortable to say the least, but after that it was a dream. And I couldn't have imagined now getting up in the night to go make a bottle. No. So much easier to breastfeed and better for the baby. My daughter has only had antibiotics once in her whole lifetime, so I definitely think that breastfeeding really does boost your immune system. It really does help the baby if you can do it and you want to do it. You know, those are the two extremely important things, because I know obviously you might not want to, and that's absolutely fine, but if you want to, don't listen to people who say you can't, when you can. It's what your body's made to do, and sometimes it just takes time and patience, and you get there. Obviously, once you've checked, there's nothing wrong. So yes, that's breastfeeding. So that's pretty much it in terms of my first experience. A couple of years after that, I went to the doctor because I'd written 2 novels, and I was doing my 3rd one at the time. I started getting pains in my hand, and he thought it was carpal tunnel, which kind of makes sense because I was doing a lot of typing. So I was sent to the hospital to get checked, and the actual person who, they did a nerve study, and the person who was running the test said, have you ever had your neck checked, or any problems with that area? And so I was like, oh, well, yeah, I did have issues with my shoulder, which I thought was my shoulder, and back pain during pregnancy. And she's like, well, you should go back to your GP and ask, can they do an MRI? Because what we found often is if your hand is hurting and you don't have any problems with your nerve study, it can often be your neck. So ask for an MRI of your neck. So I went back to my GP, and at the time when I first saw him, it was a different doctor, obviously. It always is. And when I first saw my GP about my pregnancy, and I'd explained about my neck and everything, I just got all that brush off, hadn't I, about the pull muscle. So when I went this time, I didn't even mention about my neck because I didn't think my hand had anything to do with my neck. But, you know, he was, at the time when I went with the hand pain, he was very understanding, to be honest, and seemed really nice and everything else, and had no problems sending me for the test, for the nerve study. But when I went back, his attitude was really different. He was like, oh, you know, we can't keep doing tests. when I told him about the MRI, and I'm guessing it's because MRIs are expensive, I don't know. I was like, well, this is what she told me. You know, I'm not just making it up. This is what the doctor who ran my nerve study said to ask you to do. Because of my neck issue that, well, I keep saying neck because I know what it is now, but shoulder issue. He's like, okay, well, we're sending you for this MRI, but after that, if those tests come back normal, then there's nothing else we can do. I was like, okay, fine. You know, I'm not a hypochondriac. I literally go to the doctor once in years. That's how it was. Once in, I can't even remember the last time. So anyway, I went to have the MRI, and then about 2 weeks later, I got a phone call, and it was a different doctor, as it always is. And he was like, oh, we found what's been causing all these problems. So I was like, oh, what is it? And he said, oh, you've got a bulging disc in your neck, which is pressing on a nerve, which was affecting my hand. So this whole time during pregnancy, when I had the pain initially, which they said was a pulled muscle, was not. I'd actually, my disc had come out of its position and was bulging. And obviously over time, it'd been pressing on the nerve, and to the point where it actually probably caused some damage, which was what was causing the pain in my hand. So there we go. That is my long story. So I don't know what you can take from that, but that's what happened. It was not a woman who was being hypochondriac about having back pain during pregnancy and should go swimming. I actually did have a medical condition, and the fact that I had the excess weight, obviously, of the pregnancy was making it even worse. So from how it affects me now from a day-to-day is that as long as I don't lift anything super heavy, I can manage perfectly fine with the pain. I don't take anything for it or anything like that. I'm just a bit mindful about lifting heavy stuff, and then I have a bath pretty much every night, and that really helps, just to kind of keep everything, you know, if I have done any kind of like lifting that day or anything, to keep all the pain manageable. It's not constant, but it's always there basically, but it's livable with. I can do everything that I need to do. I just can't lift anything really super heavy, which, you know, is fine. You know, it doesn't really impact my life because I don't lift stuff, generally speaking, like that heavy. But if I would have had some kind of like manual job, like if I was still nursing like now, I probably couldn't have done it. Not probably, I wouldn't, there's no way on earth I would have been able to have lifted a patient, or helped lift a patient. There's no way. But anyway, apart from that, let's move on, because let's talk about IVF number 2. So with my first IVF experience, it was all covered by the NHS. The second experience was not. But I decided to go back to the clinic that I had on the NHS, had my treatment for on the NHS, but as a private patient. So I went back to the same hospital, same, you know, clinic and everything else, but it was a very, very different experience this time. So it cost us just shy of £7,600. They had to do all the tests again, in terms of certain blood tests that you have to have done, but obviously you have to pay for them. And then I saw a different doctor, completely different than the first original doctor that I had, and the experience was very, very different. So I tried to get my appointment with the andrologist that I'd had for my NHS cycle, and they said at the time, oh no, he's fully booked up, he's not available for months. And that should have kind of made me think, but it didn't, because I was just really super excited because I wanted another baby. So we went to have our appointment, and they said, oh, don't worry, it's the head of the department that you're going to be seeing. So, all right, okay. They didn't really reassure me, but we'll go anyway. And he was so cold. I've never met kind of a doctor in, because you always associate, well, I do at least anyway, people who have children in terms of taking care of them, whether it's producing them or, you know, afterwards, midwife. You always think they're going to be warm people, at least kind, but he was so clinical, it was crazy. He was like, oh yes, we're going to change your cycle treatment this time around, or change the medication, but you need to go and have your ultrasound again to check there's no cysts. So I had my ultrasound, and there was a cyst, but at this time it was 10 centimeters. Again, it was just fluid filled, so again I had to go and have it popped, but this time there's a heck of a lot more fluid. I was watching it all come out. It's interesting. I'm not squeamish like that, so it doesn't bother me, but if you are, I apologize. It's just fluid, it's not anything scary. So I had that drained, and then I could start my protocol. This time I was doing the short protocol. So basically with this one, you don't have to do the down regulation or anything like that. You're supposed to take birth control so they can get control of your period. But I explained to them at the time I didn't need that because my periods were like on the dot. There was no chance of being, you know, any fears or whatsoever. And they were like, oh no, you still need to take the birth control. But I didn't. I just, because I knew my cycle was going to be okay. Don't do that. I'm not condoning that. But I literally knew there was no way that my period would not come when it was supposed to. And guess what happened? My period came on time. I just didn't want to take the birth control because my mum had blood clot taking the birth control, and I didn't want to take it. I didn't want to risk it. So I already had a child. I wasn't going to risk getting a blood clot just to take a pill, which I knew I didn't need because I knew my period was going to come, and it did. But like I say, I'm not condoning not listening to your doctor at all, but I just knew there was no worry at all, and there wasn't. So I was supposed to phone on the day my period came. I phoned, and then I could start my cycle. So with this short cycle, apart from the birth control I didn't take, which was just, it wasn't kind of for any reason that for the cycle other than the fact that they wanted to control your cycle. They wanted to know when your period was going to come. That was all. And luckily my period would have come at the time when it was supposed to. That's why I didn't feel like I had to take the pill, because I knew the date that they wanted me to come in was the date that I knew that my period would work out just fine. So that's why I did it. I didn't just recklessly say, oh, you know, I'm just going to ignore what you're saying. I knew that my period was going to work out well at that time, exactly, in fact, and it did. That's the reason I did it, not because for any other reason. If it would have been that my period cycle wasn't going to come at that time because it was the wrong time of the month, obviously I wouldn't have had much choice. I would have had to have done it, but it did, so I didn't have to take it. So I went for my appointment, and then we started stimulation injections again into the stomach once a day. Then I had to, well, I think it was twice a day actually, I can't remember, it was either once or twice a day. I think it must have been only just once. Yeah, it must have only been once a day. So then I went for my ultrasound, and this time I had 5 follicles, not 6. And I was booked for my egg collection, and this time my egg collection again was with a different person. And I remember her saying to me, they were all really cold. It just was not like the first cycle at all. I don't know what was going on there at that time. And she was like, oh, do you know there's only 5 follicles? And I was lay down in the room where you're supposed to be anaesthetized, and I've got this guy trying to stab me, you know, to get the IV in, and he'd stab me like 3 different places and he couldn't do it. So she's saying this to me at the time that he's stabbing me for the 4th time in this part of my arm because he couldn't get it in my hand at all to put me to sleep, saying to me, why are we doing this? There's only 5 follicles. I'm like, well, you're about to anaesthetize me and now you're telling me that we shouldn't be doing it. But, you know, these are things you think but don't say. I was just, what? Seriously? And I kind of looked at the doctor and the nurse that was stood either side of her, and the expressions on their face, I'll never forget them, because they were like, did she just say that out loud? Yeah, she did. So I was like, I don't know what you want me to say. And she's like, oh, and huffed and puffed, and I was like, okay. At the next point I was anaesthetized, so I don't know what happened after that, and then I was wheeled in, presumably to get my eggs collected. So my eggs were collected, bearing in mind I paid almost $8,000 for this, but my eggs were collected, and this time my husband wasn't allowed to come at all. I think that was part of the maybe they wouldn't have said that if he had been there, I don't know, but he wasn't allowed to come because my daughter was not allowed in at all, so he had to stay in the car with her. So she wasn't even allowed in my room, even though it was like a private room. She wasn't allowed in, so he had to stay in the car with her, so I had to do this completely by myself. So after the egg collection, they told me that there were 5 eggs, I think. Was there 5 or was there 4? No, there was 4 eggs. There was 5 follicles, 4 eggs the second time. And then the next day they phoned and said again that 3 had fertilized. They fertilized all 4, but 3 had taken. We did ICSI, which is where they inject the sperm. This time we actually did some extra things as well. So they actually what's it called? I can't even remember. Mixi, something like that. I can't remember what it is, but basically it's slightly different. So they look under a microscope, even more so at the sperm, to choose the best ones. So we paid a bit extra for that. So they phoned me the next day and we had 3 embryos, and then again it was going to be a 3-day transfer. 2 went back in on day 3, and unfortunately again the 3rd one wasn't able to freeze. So again, had to wait the 2-week wait, took my progesterone, period was late, positive pregnancy test, yay, so excited, it was brilliant, it worked 2 times, it was just amazing, felt so blessed. But at the same time, it was slightly different. So I did those clear blue pregnancy tests where it tells you how far along you are, like how many weeks. And when I did one with my daughter, it said that I was 2 to 3 weeks pregnant on the little, indicator that comes on the strip. This time it said 1 to 2 weeks. And I thought it's a bit strange at the time, but I tested a couple of days earlier because I wanted to test on the day, which sounds really weird, but I wanted to test my mum. It was the anniversary of my mum's death, and I wanted to test on that day because it was just to think, such amazing news that happened for me, and the fact that was her anniversary of her death and everything else. It just felt, I don't know, I just wanted to test early. So I put that down, the fact that I was testing 2 days early, as to why the indicator was only 1 to 2 instead of 2 to 3 weeks pregnant. But it was still in the back of my mind. I was thinking, well, I still don't feel comfortable, but okay, whatever, it's staying on positive. But the first this is how you can tell it was different. The first time with Alana, with my first daughter when I was pregnant, I didn't test after that until 3 weeks later, just to check. This time I was like testing every day. So I was testing every day and it was positive. Something didn't feel right, but I didn't want to admit to myself that something didn't feel right. Yeah, I was still testing. So every day I was testing, it was completely positive. 7 days had passed, I tested again, and it still said 1 to 2. Thinking at this point now with my daughter, it had gone to 3 weeks plus. So, I was like, okay, but it's still positive. I'm just gonna carry on testing. So I was testing every day again. Another week passed, and it was still saying 1 to 2. So here they don't let you check HCG levels. Well, I'll rephrase that. Not that they don't let you check it, but it's not a service that's offered. So I had to go privately to a private doctor to check my HCG levels, and they checked my HCG levels, and they said, yep, you're pregnant. But then the actual indicator said that I think it was 1 week or so less than what I should be. And I was thinking, well, this can't be right, because, it should be really positive right now. But, carry on. So another week passed, still getting positive tests. But I noticed I started getting a niggly pain in my left side. And I've had that kind of pain before from when I had the cyst. So I was a little bit concerned though, because I was thinking, well, it shouldn't be related to a cyst. So, obviously you think about other things, about whether it's, an ectopic or anything like that. So I went to phone the hospital, and they said, oh, come in and we'll do an ultrasound. So they did an ultrasound, and the pain at this point was agony. So literally she would turn the wand inside, because it wasn't a vaginal ultrasound, and I would be like flinching on the table because it was so painful just for her to turn the wand, the pain on my left side. She's like, oh, everything looks good. We can't see anything in terms of, we can't see the baby yet, but it's early. That's probably why your lining's really thick of your womb. We can see a bit of free fluid around the ovary, and that was probably from egg collection. She said the blood from egg collection, it's probably that's what's causing the pain. We're just going to have to wait and see and hope for the best. So I was sent home, but that night the pain was extreme. I hadn't had any kind of bleeding or anything like that. I just had this extreme pain in my left side. And, I'd taken medicine, which should say, because I hate taking medicine for the pain, because it was so painful. And then the next day, the pain just went. It gone completely, which was really bizarre. So I did another pregnancy test, and it took ages to show, ages and ages and ages. And I was thinking, oh, there's something wrong. This is not right at all. But eventually it was positive. It came through as positive, but I was still certain that something had happened. Tested again 2 days later, and the line was so faint, it was just ridiculous. So I decided myself that I was just going to stop taking the progesterone, because I thought it's obviously masking whatever the problem is, and there's obviously something really wrong. So I stopped taking the progesterone, and then about 4 days later I started spotting, but it was like microscopic spotting. There was hardly any blood at all. But I went to have an ultrasound, and they said they couldn't see anything. Everything looked completely like I wasn't pregnant anymore. So the baby unfortunately had not made it. You know, I'd had a miscarriage, but I think it was an ectopic. In my opinion, it was an ectopic that had corrected itself, and that was what the extreme pain was. Because if it would have been like a regular miscarriage, I would have expected tons of, well, not tons, but blood and everything else, because that's just what normally happens, like pains in your stomach. But I didn't have any pains in my stomach apart from on the left hand side. The blood that passed was, I'd say, a very, very mild period, lasted 4 days and then stopped, and that was it. And I went to the clinic, my IVF clinic that I paid £8,000 for. I told them what had happened, and they said, oh, you come in anyway because it's part of your thing, so your cycle, consultation, whatever. So I went in, and I remember walking into the room and saying, I didn't say anything. She just looked at me. She was like so happy, smiling. I'm thinking, okay. She's like, oh, we're gonna do your ultrasound now, and she was so excited. I was like, ultrasound for what? And she's like, what, did you, to see the baby? To see the baby? I'm like, no, I phoned you about, a week ago and told you that I'd had a miscarriage. And she was like, oh. And then I had the ultrasound done, just triple check everything. There was nothing there. Everything had come away, and it was absolutely fine, back to normal. And that was it. And that was the end. We could only do that cycle. We couldn't do any more. Because there's no way we could afford to do it again, and they didn't obviously know why it happened, because it's just one of those things. But yeah, that was it. So that was my IVF experience ×2, pregnancy, birth, breastfeeding story. Obviously I would have loved to have more kids. I wanted 7 kids. I just wanted this huge family, because I absolutely adore kids, but you get what you can. And I have the most amazing daughter, and it's and I have a lot of pets. I have 7 pets. I've got 6 dogs and 1 cat, so I got my big family, but 1 human, the rest fur. But if you're thinking, oh, there's other options and everything else, absolutely. And for me, there would have been other options, but not for my husband. He didn't want to adopt. It wasn't for him. He didn't want to do sperm donor or anything like that. To him, he said that was cheating. So to me, that didn't make any sense, and it still doesn't now. But you can't make someone else feel the way you do. If your partner doesn't want to do something, then you can't say, well, I'm going to do it anyway, because you just can't. And I actually said to him at the time when he said that, why? It just didn't make sense. And if the tables would have been turned, and it would have been me that had the fertility issues, it wouldn't have been a problem. But he didn't want to, so we've never been able to have any more children. But like I said, I have the best daughter in the world, so I've more than been blessed. But I just wanted to share this video really so that other people can get an insight into what it's like, and if you've got any friends who are experiencing things like this, you can maybe support them in some way. It happens more than you know. Every time I went to the fertility clinic, it was packed. Prior to any of this happening, I always thought it was really easy to get pregnant, because that's what you see. You don't see all the struggles, but I tell you what, it's not. And the amount of people that are in those clinics, it's more common than you know. And if you're going through this, I'm so sorry, and I wish you all the best for a positive outcome, because I know it's extremely difficult. And there were many people going through my cycle. I joined like various forums and things that we were going through together. So I would say seek advice and support from anyone else who's going through the same thing as you, if you can. But even if you can't, just talk and be open about how you feel, and know that there are people out there who will support you, and I will really wish you the best of luck. That's everything. So I'll see you in the next video, back to normal content. But I hope that was interesting for you to see what it's like in terms of fertility problems. And yeah, that's really all I can say. If you've got any questions, leave them below, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.